What's up, guys? It's LOH with Low Tech, and this is a quick review of the Toshiba Click 10 laptop 2-in-1 running Windows 10. This is the 64GB edition. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Best Buy, you can also get it directly from Microsoft. Overall, a lot of people are interested in this tablet for one reason, that it is a tablet and it does come with a keyboard dock, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. But one of the things people are really having questions about, though, is the performance of the Intel Atom Z8300 that's inside of here. This is a new chip running off a Cherry Trail, and this is the lowest end version that they actually sell that's inside this tablet. So let's first start off taking a look at the device. So it's a 10.1 inch screen, 1920 by 1200, so it's 16 by 10, which is nice for tablets because it actually functions much better when it's working this way in portrait mode. On landscape, you do get a lot of vertical real estate, so you do a lot less scrolling, as well as it being such a high resolution for at least a Windows device and a small screen, it works really, really well. The downside of this screen is that it is not a laminated screen, so the actual display is slightly below the glass. Not a big deal, but it does increase the reflectivity of the screen. You can probably even see the camera in here. It's really hard to not get a reflection on this screen. So it works as a great mirror, if that's a plus for you. This is the device all pumped all the way up to 100%. And for most things, it'll do okay. You won't really get a lot of outdoor usability, especially with the reflections on the screen. But it is easy to use indoors for the most part. But even at this highest brightness, like I can see the reflection of the wall right behind me through this. So it's bright enough for most people, but if you're planning on traveling with it, which a tablet, especially with a dock, you most likely will be, it's probably not the best screen for that. The plus side of that, though, is it does get pretty dim for at least a Windows laptop, so you can use it in a darker setting without too much issue. The screen here is glass, which is nice. It's not necessarily, plastic or something like that, so you're not going to scratch it that easy. But the rest of the device is plastic, so going to the edges here with all the ports to connect it to the dock, this is all plastic. It feels pretty nice, I must say, but it's not necessarily going to wow anybody with the build quality. It's rather thick for a laptop, for a laptop screen and for a tablet. But for the most part, it feels really good in the hand. You don't feel like you're going to drop it. You actually have a really nice grip. So I actually prefer it, the thickness of this compared to some of the other tablets that you can get. But it's not necessarily a light device just because it has so much stuff packed into here. So the back's plastic, not a lot of give, not a lot of flex, no creaking. It feels really well made. Moving off to the keyboard is a little bit of a different story. It's still plastic. Nothing too surprising about it there. There is some give in the keyboard, so it's not necessarily the most sturdy keyboard, although the travel on the keys is actually pretty good for how thin it is. They did cut a lot of these keys here on the edge to make everything as big as possible since it's a 10-inch device. I did have some issues initially trying to get used to this keyboard layout, but for the most part it works okay. The touchpad is responsive and it scrolls really well. The biggest gripe for me is how recessed it is. Up here it's not really recessed almost at all, and down here it actually recessed several millimeters. And when it travels quite a bit to get a click, especially since you can travel it much. You can push it down further after it clicks, so it can click and then you keep pressing it down, which kind of gives it a little of a cheap feeling. It works, and it's not my favorite touchpad though. The most interesting thing that I found though in the build is the bottom of the keyboard is a different color than everything else on the device. Not sure why they did that. I'm guessing so this is the side that's going to be touching the ground the most, and so they wanted it to make it last and doesn't scratch. No fingerprints or anything like this. It's a slightly textured back, but it's off-white, while everything else is metallic. So I'm not sure why they did that, but it is what it is. The ports on here on the keyboard are 2 USB 2 full-size ports, which is nice to have, especially on a tablet. It would have been a little bit nicer to at least have one on the device itself, mainly because if you have a flash drive or something like an external hard drive or something plugged into here, and you forget that it's plugged in or something like that, and you unhook the device or unhook the tablet from the keyboard, you'll automatically eject those things and you can corrupt some files and such like. So it may not be the best thing for long-term use, but for if you need to plug something in for a little bit and unplug it later, it's definitely nice to have those. It's definitely better than having none at all. When you combine both of these parts, it is fairly easy to plug in. I didn't really have any issues trying to find the holes or anything like that. They're pretty generous with the clips. A couple things I noticed was it doesn't actually really go back very far, mainly because of how heavy the back is compared to the front. So they can't really afford to let it go back anymore. So at the slightest bit of pressure and it will fall backwards. But when it closes, it does make a pretty convincing laptop. It actually looks rather handsome, especially with the silver side. The bottom is still visible and it's kind of ugly, but other than that, it actually looks really nice. Again, no creaking, no flex. It feels just like a laptop, and for what it is, it should. For the price, the performance is really good, especially for just as a laptop, not as a laptop, but as a tablet. $400 laptops would easily best this in pretty much every case, but $400 tablets and under, it would be at least in the same ballpark. The issue really comes into when we go into multitasking, doing multiple things at once. If you were to say have an application installing in the background, everything would really come to a halt while it installed. So even simple things like web browsing will freeze. Not everything won't actually load until you actually get everything done with the installation process. And that has to do with the processor for one thing, but also has to do with the memory inside of here. It's 64 gigabytes. It's not an SSD, it's eMMC, which is the slower kind of SD card-like internal memory, which really struggles when it comes to multiple things written at the same time. So when you are trying to load an application while also running another application, something like that, the read speeds can really go down, especially if you're writing something like in an installation case. So if you're okay with doing it one application at a time, which if you're using it as a tablet, most of the time that's what you'll be doing. You won't really be multitasking, especially with a screen this size. You'll probably won't run into many issues with performance in day-to-day use as long as you're not trying to run anything too strenuous on the device. But if you are trying to do multiple things, maybe even have like this connected to a TV or something like that and have multiple things running, then you will probably run into a lot of lag. So much more so than you would get in, say, like a Core M product, probably at least equal, if not maybe even more so than some of the other older Atoms, mainly because this is the lowest end Atom that they now currently make. The cameras on the device are actually really good for a Windows tablet. It's not something you really want to be taking pictures of with for long term, but in a pinch for Skype chat, the front-facing camera is reasonably good quality and it's really responsive. The back-facing camera is also really good quality, but what you'll notice is it takes a little bit for it to respond. There's a slight delay when you are trying to use it this way. It's just not quite live. But the quality is still pretty good, so if you're actually using it for picture taking, you're probably fine. If you're going to be using it for video, definitely not professionally, but it should do in a pinch. The battery life on this device really depends on the backlight of the screen. The battery itself is not tremendously big, but the processor is very frugal. So if you can really tone down the brightness of the display, then you can get some pretty impressive battery life for a Windows tablet. At 100% brightness, if you're actually going to be playing with the device a lot, like going to a lot of web browsing, things like that, you're only probably going to get 4 to 5 hours out of it. If you are going to decrease the brightness, you could probably bump that up to at least 6 plus, definitely. And only the lowest brightness would you ever try to get maybe 8 out of it. And this display is just not bright enough to really use anywhere with a lot of lights at anything less than even 25% is pretty dim. So you really want to be pumping up the brightness a lot. 100% is probably what I'd use most of the time. So really expect to get only about 4 to 5 hours out of this device if you have screen on time. As you can see here, the percentage, it says right now it's 94%, 4 hours and 23 minutes left to go. So that's what I found about accurate. It kind of depends what you're doing, though. You could probably squeak that up to about closer to 5 if you weren't doing something so strenuous. But even as we were talking, you went down to 3 hours 43 minutes. So it's definitely not something of a battery champ, but it's not terrible by any means. The speakers on this device are pretty weak, and they do have a tendency to become really thrashy. It sometimes sounds like one of the speakers is almost loose. I'm not sure exactly what the issue is, but especially at 100% volume, certain sounds really make the speakers buzz, which is not necessarily something you want to hear. But in terms of quality, you do get some pretty nice sound out of it, as long as you're not really stretching the limits of the speakers. This is at max volume though, so you may or may not be happy with this level of sound out of a tablet. It is pretty small. This is the 64 gigabyte version of this device, and it's really the only one I'd actually recommend to anyone, mainly because 32 is just too small for any real use. There is a micro SD card slot to expand, but at 32 gigabytes, you can see we would have almost no space left over. So this is the 64 gig version, 57 gigabytes of after actually everything's formatted, and only 35 gigs free. At the end of the day, though, should you buy this tablet? And the answer is a maybe, and it's probably the most strong maybe I've ever given on any of my reviews. And that's because there is so much to like about it. The screen is really nice quality, even though there is a lot of reflection on it. And the design of the device is pretty good. And, the build quality is all right, other than the questionable plastic in some places. The performance of this device really leaves a lot to be desired in so many different ways. Sometimes even extensive web pages can make it go slow. So if you're going to be using anything other than the most basic functionalities of a computer, I would steer away from this laptop. Yes, for $350, $375 some odd dollars, you do get this nice package that really, for the price, could have been awesome, but the processor in here, the memory in here, and the storage in here are just too slow when all combined. You'll just have a hard time getting a reasonable amount of work done on this. So if for anybody other than the lightest and most casual of users, I would probably suggest going with something else. That being said, if you are okay with this level of performance, and you are okay with the design choices, and you're okay with knowing that you could get a much faster computer for the same amount of money or less, if you didn't want something that detached, then sure, go for it. But if you are okay with losing the touchscreen and losing the tablet functionality, you could get something under $200, such as the Acer CloudBook, that would perform just as well. And if you were okay getting something a little bigger. There are a number of devices, such as even the Nextbook Flex 11, which the screen is a little bit bigger, maybe not quite as nice as this one, but the performance would be very much the same, and it's much cheaper. And then there's also the Goliath in the room right above it with the Microsoft Surface 3, which is a little more expensive, yes, but the performance is substantially better, and it has the higher end Atom processor in there, as well as a more reasonable amount of RAM, and so on and so forth. But for $400, if you're okay with these limitations, then this is a really nice looking device, and it is at least capable enough for entertaining purposes and casual use. So thanks for watching, guys. This is LOH of Low Tech, and this has been my quick review of the Toshiba Click 10 Windows 10 2-in-1. Subscribe.